Awesome. Thank you. Uh, and thanks everyone for joining us. It's awesome to be able to actually talk about this project now that it's done. And I'm also happy to see some of our other team members and collaborators on this call. So it was definitely a team effort and appreciate you being here. I'm not going to give a long intro for me and Kareem. If you want that intro, you can go read the bios that we posted. I think for today, I'll just say like, hi, we're here from Colloqate. Colloqate, if you don't know us, we're a nonprofit that is focused on um, racial, social, and cultural justice in the built environment. And we do that through community organizing, through advocacy, and then also through our design work. So, with that context, I think a great starting point for this presentation is actually a question that I'd love for folks to give their reflections on in the chat. Probably just give like a couple minutes for you to put what's on your minds in the chat, but really wanting to explore what is justice in architectural design? What does that mean for you? Don't think too hard. You could all write an essay on it, right? Just want your first thoughts.
I can't use the chat.
Oh, that could explain why people aren't using the chat.
Yeah, well, it's weird.
Well, we are getting some good thoughts.
Oh,
Equal access to facilities, freedom to exist as you are, public space. Everyone deserves a safe place to live. Serving community without discrimination or exclusion, welcoming, inclusive, universal design, agency. I love that.
That's lovely. I can't see any of those messages, but I love them all. Another thing to troubleshoot. Okay.
Can you click up on the chat at the top?
Yeah, I see some messages. Like I see Jocelyn's message, but I don't see any of these ones Kareem just read off. Interesting.
Another thing to troubleshoot, like you said.
With that, I will go to the next slide. So I think our profession is changing a lot. I'm actually excited about how education has been shifting recently. But I will say for myself and many other architects, a lot of us were trained to focus on the building itself, the object, as the desired outcome and what we're trained to create. So it's like, hey, look at this cool thing we've made. And but as we practice, definitely as I practice, I'm learning a lot more about the architecture of relationships. I don't know if any of you ever had that professor who was like, hey, you need to show your project in context to really evaluate how your design is working. And usually what they just meant with that was just like, let's see the building visually on the street that it's on. And it really is just this visual, does it fit visually in its block? The more I practice, the more I've become aware that the real impact of architecture is in the creation and maintenance of relationships that are a lot bigger than that block or the building itself. And so if we were actually to show the context of our work, we could imagine actually zooming out to the scale of the city, to our state, to the planet. And what we contribute to creating as architects includes like whether a historically Black neighborhood has clean air and water, whether community members have the knowledge to advocate for their own spatial needs. Do they have a better understanding of that after having worked with us? Our work contributes to whether someone feels welcome in public space in our city. It also contributes to whether the soils in our forests are rich enough to sustain our plant, animal, and insect communities or create shelter and air for generations to come. And then, as I think most people who come to COTE events are aware, our work is very closely tied to whether our future planet will sustain our future generations. So, one way to think about justice in this context is that justice asks us to look at all of those relationships that our work has to its broader context across time, looking well into the past to understand where our work and profession and things we create may have hurt some of these relationships and one another, and how we might need to help repair a community of care that makes right what was done wrong. I think a lot of justice efforts have centered around communities of people, including communities of color, who have been historically marginalized, and really understanding that harm, what needs they have now that need to be met, and designing with communities. And that is something Colloqate talks a lot about. But today I also want to posit that the earth itself is the same. She is a living community that has also been extracted from for profit without concern for her well-being. And seeking environmental sustainability is not actually that separate from our other work with marginalized communities. We can consider what harm has been done, listen and learn what needs now need to be met, and design a future where she is able to thrive. I think in an effort to save our human existence, sometimes with sustainability conversations, we get really caught up in technicalities, building energy use, counting the carbon, detailing that mass timber stealing. And sometimes we forget that what we're responsible for is a living and breathing Mother Earth that also wants to be respected and cared for so that she can heal and care for us. And so with the conversation today, kind of want to talk about nature as being a part of our family and community. Justice and equity go hand in hand. So to set some context for the Midland project, the Multnomah County Libraries did consider equity and justice in its resource allocation for their bond work. This is a map of the libraries kind of previous to all the new bond work that is happening now. And as the library system was learning about needs that they wanted to meet, they saw a distinct lack of equity in East Portland. You can see a box where there's not that many libraries, and there's a pretty huge empty space around Midland. So this is where 40% of the population lives, fastest growing population area in the city, but it only had about 24% of the library resources and space. And this is where many communities of color have been displaced. It's home to a large concentration of immigrants, refugees, low-income seniors, and unhoused communities. And it's also an area that's been underserved in green space and spaces for gathering, both indoors and outdoors. So expanding Midland and creating more space for people became a top priority, and is why they put the project into their chapter 1 of all of their bond work, which has been quickly followed by the flagship library, East County Library, which you may have also heard about. I'll pass it to Kareem. Give us a project overview.
Thanks, Sophia. Yeah, so I'll share first just a little bit about the project context. As Sophia noted, the location and the rationale for focusing resources on Midland. But Midland Library as a project is a 30,000 square foot project, a renovation of existing 20,000 square feet with a 6,000 square foot new addition. That addition is mass timber, although it's not super visible. The project budget, 19.4 million, construction costs, 31 million total, and tracking towards LEED Gold certification. If you want to jump to the next slide. So before getting too far, we also want to need to acknowledge that Colloqate did not and could not have done this project alone. So special gratitude, especially to our partners at Bora for supporting us, Bora Architects, supporting us in this opportunity to design Colloqate's first building. This is the first building that our team has designed and carried through to completion. So we were the design architect and engagement lead for this project, and Holgate Library, we led engagement on that as well, and those two projects were paired. Bora was the architect of record on Midland and led the design of Holgate. And I have to say Bora really guided us through setting sustainability goals and ensuring that those carried through. Our team was deeply appreciative of their support and mentorship, but there were also many minority and emerging businesses, minority-led and owned businesses on this team. A bunch of folks are and partners are listed on this slide. I've also got the list of community design advocates who worked on this project with us, and I'll share a little bit more about what that is on the next slide. But first, I do want to make a note that as a minority / emerging practice ourselves, we know it can be easy to feel like a checkbox, like we're on the team. Are we helping to meet some sort of quota, helping to get those points on that RFP scoring process? Okay, cool. And then we won the project and it was a done deal, but then where's the continuing sort of support for growth or investment in organizations that are minority-led or emerging? So for those of you who work in firms, maybe larger firms that might partner with organizations like ours, I would invite you to consider beyond the financial benefit that smaller and emerging and minority-led practices get from working with firms like yours. How do your team structures and design processes also demonstrate the respect and repair for historic harms? The processes that we enact internal to our project teams ultimately are mirrored in the ways that we relate to community members outside of our project teams and the projects that we build. So I have to say that, but moving on to our community design advocates, as I noted in the previous slide. So with every project that Colloqate takes on, we make an intentional effort to recruit community members as a advocacy or organizing cohort who are paid to directly be a part of our engagement and design processes. They are recruited from the communities and stakeholder groups that are disproportionately directly impacted by the project and historically underrepresented or even intentionally marginalized from being involved in decision-making processes that influence the ways that these projects manifest. So for this project, we had 14 paid community design advocates. They worked with our design team for 5 months during the design process on both of those libraries that we noted, Midland and Holgate. They recruited from the communities that rely heavily on those libraries for meeting basic daily needs and beyond. And the way that they work is supported by us, but not directed by us. So we recognize that communities carry expertise and wisdom and knowledge, especially how to communicate with each other appropriately, how to structure engagement and community organizing events in the way that's going to reach people in culturally responsive manner. And so this team of CDAs, they designed their own engagement and outreach plans. We provided the financial resources, some mentorship and support, strategic support, for them to be able to conduct those activities, and then for us to be able to get qualitative data back to synthesize into our design. And this is just some of what that can look like from a range of our projects. But most of these types of engagement strategies show up across all of our projects. So we encourage people to create connections and build relationships in the process of engagement on a particular project in ways that are natural and meaningful to them, not ways that we prescribe. We do this because you may have encountered the term trust deficit, or you may not, but it may make apparent sense. Often communities that are equity seeking or justice seeking have plenty of reasons not to trust architects or the people and institutions that hire us. But communities do trust folks that they are in relationship with already. So if someone that you know invites you to a barbecue or invites you to fill out a survey or organizes a focus group and feeds you dinner and has a conversation with you, you're a lot more likely to build some trust and therefore build some investment in the process and outcomes of that project. So that ranges across the board to the examples that you see on these slides, from paid youth design programs to co-creating activities to storytelling events where we're just listening to people's stories and experiences of place. Listening is a really powerful tool that goes a long way towards trust building and relationship building, as Sophia noted earlier. And all of that translates into a tremendous amount of feedback, of qualitative and quantitative data. But the qualitative information is where the real power and influence for our design efforts really draws from. We can say we've reached 1,000 people, but if we don't understand what the themes and narratives and stories are that those people are bringing to the table and why this place will matter to them and why their experiences of similar spaces have been positive or negative, then we really can't design for the experiences that they want or against the experiences that will be harmful. So in this case, qualitative data that we gathered was the stories of people's experiences intersecting with the library system. And we're listening for overarching narratives, themes within those narratives. For example, narratives that emerged around identity, culture, and belonging could have themes around the ways that people gather to be in community together, maybe around food or around specific activities or cultural events. And then we're also looking for the implications of those narratives in our work. So for spatial implications, for example, those are things that we need to account for in our architectural design. And that's going to be the most familiar type of implication for, I think, people in this audience. But we don't censor what people bring to us. We don't tell them, no, you can't tell us that story because it's not relevant to our work. We're just designing a building. We listen for program implications as well. The ways that space can be best used to meet community needs. And then we also need to be listening for policy implications, the rules that govern access to the design process or to the resources that the built space provides. If those rules continue to be exclusionary or continue to marginalize people who rely on the resources contained in the building, then we see our duty as designers as bringing to the client and advocating on behalf of community members for policy changes that will enable a more just use of space. A beautiful building that's inaccessible and unresponsive to the needs of the most impacted by its presence is ultimately not a just use of resources. And if our goal is systems change, which is ultimately necessary to avert climate catastrophe, we're going to have to consider all of these implications together to inform design outcomes. So what you see on the slide is like a snapshot of the implications reports that we put together, which are really like tracking tools. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact, and if folks are taking inspiration from this, that a tremendous amount of time and capacity is needed to account for this work as well, which needs to be factored into the way that we approach design processes altogether. You can go to the next slide, Sophia. So that implications report that you saw and that spreadsheet that you saw, those are internal facing documents, and we create many of them. But we do also try to make our implications reports available publicly so that that knowledge is not just lost within the design team's records, but can be utilized by community members in the future as they're advocating and coming to engagement processes on other similar projects that affect them. One of the other ways that we try to incorporate and keep ourselves accountable for the feedback that we get from community in that synthesis process is creating diagrams, plans, and documents used by the design team to communicate to our internal stakeholders, and then also to communicate to community members outside of the design team proper, that directly tie the commentary and the narratives from our engagement and dialogue to spatial outcomes. So you can see, for example, a community art showcase. Why is that important? Because community members expressed how important creating and seeing art that their communities generate is in feeling at home and safe and like they belong in a particular space. We make a space for it, but we don't want to lose the why. It wasn't just our good idea, right? Similarly, having the first ever sensory room in the library system here in Portland, or the teen room, making sure that all ages, cultures, and bodies have access to these spaces in equitable ways. I'll make one note on a particular design move, which is not necessarily the most glamorous, but it is pretty fundamental to everyone's experience of public spaces, which is the restrooms. Restrooms come up as a point of tension, particularly in public spaces like the library. They in the previous iteration of Midland before the renovation, the restroom was all the way at one end near the entrance. There was only one way in and out, and it was a site where lots of safety or security incidents tended to take place, which then would mean no restroom access for anyone else in the library. Maybe the exit is blocked. And why? Because you have people going into those spaces trying to meet basic needs that they might not be able to in their own. For example, unhoused folks who are trying to take care of personal hygiene because they don't have a shower, or someone going through a mental health crisis who needed space to calm down and kind of decompress, but there's no other alternative for some degree of privacy. But then other things that came up as we were talking to community members about restrooms and working towards the library's new policies around all gender restrooms. Thanks for the encouragement, Stephanie. So as we were talking about the new direction that the library was implementing, that the county was actually implementing at a policy level of all gender restrooms, as we began having conversations with certain immigrant and refugee communities, communities of culture, for whom like that concept was very foreign, very abstract, and also led to like concerns of, well, this is great, and we want people who need all user restrooms to have them. We want all genders to feel welcome, but we know that if our community is here in an event, that there's just going to be some people who aren't comfortable going into that space. We were able to have a dialogue and say, all right, well, we'll create more family restrooms throughout the library so that there are spaces that if your whole family needs to go, or if you're not comfortable in an all user space, you can do that, and it doesn't remove the resource from other people's access. So finding the room for alignment, not necessarily forcing everyone into agreement, really came out of having deep dialogue with folks, and the community design advocates did played a primary role in facilitating those conversations. I don't have a picture of the restrooms because they look like restrooms, but they worked, and folks are able to use them and feel much better about the layout. Another thing I do want to hone in on, though, is the feedback loop. So we create all of these tools to track things for ourselves, but as anyone who's been involved in an architectural process, maybe from the community side, knows, if you're not in the room, and if you don't get that meeting notice, and if you're not on the right email list, or if you missed that poster that went up, or maybe if you're just like working on the night that there's a community meeting and that's the only one happening in this phase, it's really easy to get out of the loop And it's possible that the design team is incorporating your feedback, but you may never know. So when you show up at that space, even if it's been incorporated, if you don't know where to look for it, or how your input has influenced the final outcomes, you might not feel seen, you might not feel like the space was actually designed with you in mind. So we work to create feedback loops throughout the process of design, from events to tabling to direct mailers. For this project, actually, we created direct mailers and translated them into each of the languages that the library services. The 5 we speak your language languages: Russian, Vietnamese, Chinese, Mandarin, Spanish. I think I might be forgetting one. Maybe that's it. But creating these mailers that then we worked with their team to directly send out to a 1-mile radius of each library, with an English copy and a copy of the language that was most spoken within that zip code after English. And these posters are also available at the libraries. We're also available at other libraries for folks to pick up, with digital copies available online and a website to host them. So trying to cover our bases, because we know there are many more people who do not access information online than those who do. And we want to break through the digital divide as much as we want to break through linguistic divides. So pushing for feedback loops, and creating these beautiful artifacts of the process too, that then people can hold on to. So not only is there a building, but as you're waiting for that building, you also have something that you can put up on a wall and show your friends. So I'm gonna shift it back to Sophia, less about the process there and more on connections to nature and outcomes, and how this connected to our sustainability and climate justice goals.
Yeah. So let's look at the design together. What came together out of all of those priorities that we heard. I'm going to start with connection to nature, and start with this slide to kind of take us back to this idea of that we're listening to our marginalized communities, and that community is not just our human and people community, but there is our greater community who's also saying, let me be in community with you. Stop displacing our forests and our natural community from, stop displacing me from my home in order to create yours. And in return, let me bless you with fresh air, cool breeze, clean your water, and soothe your anxious thoughts. Which goes hand in hand with the communities of people we heard from, who are also saying, hey, give me access to nature and outdoor space. My communities have historically been neglected and pushed to areas that have less parks and trees. We don't want heat islands. We want spaces to play, to eat, gather, read, rest, and celebrate outdoors. A lot of people talked about connection to nature in our conversations. So this is the existing condition. Midland Library actually butts onto a pretty significant city park space. But a lot of people who visited the library actually noted in presentations, they were like, I had no idea there was a park there. The connection to the park was just not super strong. The image to the left shows a piece of library property that sits next to that park, and it was really just weeds and actually a place that often collected needles and was problematic. So we changed that, and one of the team members who's here with us is Jocelyn from Place, because the Place was our landscape architect. So I do want to thank them for all the work they did to help strengthen the connection and create the outdoor spaces. This here you're seeing is just a very different experience of being next to the building and having a strong sense of connection to the park and places, where people can sit together collectively with tables out near that park and just outside of some new large community rooms. And that is in comparison to this image before on the right, which is you just have kind of a wall that some people described as being fortress-like. So connection of the building out, and then also the plaza to the park. Looking the other way, we can see more of this plaza idea, and making space for celebrations. This place did a great job laying out the site so that it can incorporate or hold community tents for things like resource fairs, and celebrations. Just outside of the photo range, there's also parking spaces where food trucks could plug in, or resource trucks, so things like shower trucks, um, to meet additional needs. You can see, um, there is power at the seating as well outside to sort of extend people's ability to use that space. Particularly hearing from some of our houseless community members how helpful that is to them. And then one other thing you're seeing in this image is the bike parking, which is not that new and fascinating. But people have also expressed appreciation for the bike tools that have been that are also outside and accessible, as well as EV parking that's also just out of view. So I think, yeah, place did a good job making one space do a lot. Um, Underneath the colorful canopy that you're seeing, we have sheltered outdoor space, which is something that's also new to the library system, something people really ask for in our climate. Previously, people got dripped on as they entered the Midland Library. That seemed to be a common experience, and people are like, we don't want that. Um, Other things you're seeing with connection to nature are just some of the shapes and forms. The columns are more tree columns with some branching elements. And you can also see this beautiful canopy art that was created by Lillian Pham and Paula de la Cruz, which really beautifully kind of weaves together some local community stories and experiences, which I guess are a little harder to see in this particular photo, but kind of like reflecting our communities and also tying that in with some natural beauty. And then the sunstone sculptures out in the plaza were by Hibikozo, and also based on some of our natural elements from our local space. In the back, this is where the weeds and needles were. There is now a children's garden, which includes multisensory play and space for families can actually take books outside of the library and be reading them outside, while still being within the library zone. And there's also just next to that a why am I forgetting what words we actually use? This is a reading garden, I think is what we called it. A reading garden.
Talking circle.
Yeah,
Talking circle.
there is the talking and conversation circle within that space, which was designed, a lot of it in collaboration with a PSU Indigenous Studies class. So Athena Shepherd was one of our Indigenous community design advocates, who was teaching a class with Judy Bluehorse Skelton, and is just one example of a space that was designed in terms of like how it's located, what things feel significant to have represented. You kind of see the cardinal directions here, in that circle. And one thing with that circle, we'll talk more about it with the gathering circle inside, but just like the importance of circles. And like it's been kind of fun seeing how people have been using this circle and another circle inside, because it's not just for the Native community, it's also like a really lovely collective gathering element. I'm gonna go into the inside. So again, some before photos. You can see that there was kind of an overwhelming sense of bookshelves instead of a focus on people and space. That was a balance the library wanted to shift. You do see wood with the shelves, but kind of this like monotonous range of things. For the interior design, we worked a lot with the interior designers at Bora to explore some different concepts of colors, materials, one of which was this concept of water. There were other ones like forest or weaving, but we actually put this out for a community vote and had a pretty good amount of participation. I don't remember the exact numbers, but a lot of people voted and voted for water as something that really resonated with them. And so that's kind of what you'll see as we go into some of the interior images. I did also want to point out here with the big speech bubble, materials are so important in architecture. I'm sure you're mostly aware of this already, but just the health of materials through pollutants in the air. Material choices can really help keep communities healthier and value the labor that folks get into in the sourcing. So again, call out to Bora because they helped us a lot with the material selections for helping us actually achieve really good low emitting materials with healthy life cycles and sourcing. Also, our contractors who helped us really strategize around keeping the air clean all the way through the construction process too. Swinnerton construction. So seeing water. The graphic on the ceiling here is the Big River, which is also known as the Columbia today. You can see the movement and the baffles sort of echoing the movement of and contour of the river. You can see the colors of the river showing up, and you can start seeing some of the river elements showing up in some of like the play elements on the left side of this image. Here we're actually seeing a bit more of that. So you can see some of the large interactive river themed play in the kids area. You can also see some big expansive views out to the park. The building was great. It actually had those before, and a lot of people are like, do not block those views. And I think we were able to make them better by actually having a lot of the shelves, all of the shelves be lowered so that really you get a good view out of the library from almost every space that you're in. We also worked a lot on just like daylight quality and minimizing glare. So lots of windows also means like, how do we make sure people aren't blinded? So that was another thing we studied. One more view kind of looking towards the kids area from the living room area. You can see that it connects right to the outdoor space. So to the left outside the windows would be that reading garden. And then just like if you looked forward into the photos where the kids play is, right next to the kids' indoor area. And the adjacencies of all these spaces were pretty intentional. We heard from many communities of culture that like, hey, spaces in the US seem like they're really built for one generation at a time or individuals rather than groups. Can you help make this space more welcoming to multi-generational families who come in together and caregivers and kids to be together, for instance? So the idea of a living room next to a play area kind of has that multi-generational connection, which may not be present in a lot of our public spaces in this country. Here's the gathering circle indoors. This is another one space that was designed with the Indigenous Studies class at PSU. They really pushed us towards, again, having multi-generational seating, various seating options, soft seating, seating with arms. And then you can see the idea of the river coming in here with the pebble-shaped furniture. Also, I am so happy to see plants in this library because that was something the library was like, I don't know if we can take care of plants. But so many people wanted that connection to plants. And then again, huge highlight to one of our artists, Kanani Miyamoto, who did the artwork on the walls as well. that really tied this whole space together. The quote here is what I was referring to earlier with the circles. We ended up putting a lot of importance on creating these circular spaces within the building because we'd heard that circles were significant spatial forms for people's cultures, both in terms of gathering and also some of the things they represent, including equality and life cycles. This is not just the Indigenous community. It was something we heard resonated with multiple communities of culture served by the library. Okay, carbon is the next thing I wanted to go into. Oops. All right. So, I feel like folks are probably familiar with the idea of reducing embodied carbon, not expending new energy and carbon to rebuild things from scratch, and really valuing what we have already. So we actually kept pretty much all of the existing building with the new redesign. We ended up reducing, which helped us to reduce embodied carbon while focusing new construction on creating a welcoming entry porch and gathering spaces that improve the building envelope efficiency. So the little diagram on the left, the gray is the existing building, and then the black is earlier sketch of the shape of the addition, but this is where community gathering spaces are, a new entry, and staff area. And the approach to actually keeping the building, doing a very specific new build alongside some new mechanical systems and energy efficient systems, reduced the building's energy use so that the new building is almost 3 times more efficient than it was before. And Eris, our mechanical engineer, has actually helped us to figure out, like, comparatively to rebuilding a lot of new, this approach actually helps to save more energy over the lifespan of all the materials and construction used. So again, we're seeing how the building's part of a larger ecosystem. One other carbon story is solar. There's actually no solar panels on this building, which feels a little embarrassing sometimes, but actually that was very intentional too. So we, with using the existing building, as we were studying getting the solar panels up there, we learned that the roof couldn't support them. And so it would require a lot of rebuild. It would require new structure. And the op center was going up, and operation center for the library just down the street. And we learned that, hey, if we actually move the solar panels to the operations center, that building can be net zero. We don't need to waste all this extra material to be putting the solar panels up there and generating energy. And it's more efficient because we don't need to have a double system. So the solar panels are actually at the op center and in the larger ecosystem of like multiple buildings across the library system, that actually ended up being the better carbon story, which was sort of a moment and a little curiosity during the project. Lastly, with the construction waste of the demolition we did do, Swinnerton was able to divert at least 75% of that construction waste so that we were thinking about materials all the way to their end point. This is just to show again the addition that's outside of that red brick fortressy wall. On the right, you can see the community room, and you can see where that old brick wall is still visible inside. So we still have that connection to the old. The last thing that this enabled was us to create a new identity in the for the library entry, the ability to reflect cultural identity, really showcase patterns and have that new art with the canopy. Colloqate Colloqate hosted pattern making workshops. I'm not going to go too much into them, but people brought objects, told stories about those objects, and created patterns, which ended up inspiring the pattern that was created for the exterior panels of the library. This is my last slide. So one little hidden secret in the project, which I will say I wish was a little less hidden, is that the building is actually mass timber, the roof structure. A lot of it got covered up, but it is there. And I want to go back to the idea of repairing harm. So we talk a lot about carbon as something to minimize. Like carbon's bad, trap it, keep it out, like it's only something bad. But in a reciprocal ecosystem, carbon actually is not a pollutant. It's a life-giving element that, when respected, supports abundance and resilience. And so wanted to just bring in this graphic. Don't know if anyone recognizes it, but it's from Alan Organshy's Regenerative City. It shows how forests have stored atmospheric carbon into terrestrial carbon over time. So that's sort of this graph where the stuff in the sky ends up down in the ground. It also shows how that was rapidly undone during the Industrial Revolution, and posits how bio-based construction materials can help us to store carbon and restore the richness of carbon in our soils. When we aim only to reduce carbon usage, we're often only minimizing harm. But there are actually possibilities in construction to create a built environment that actively contributes to the health and well-being of both the environment and inhabitants. So it doesn't just minimize harm, it actively regenerates its surrounding natural systems. And that's something that is feeling more and more possible with wood construction. So could architecture participate in regeneratively healing the harm we've done to the earth and our plant and animal communities? So yes, we can, or at least we need to try. So that's it. That was the presentation. But yeah, just trying to be better to our communities. Great.
Wow, thank you. Thank you both so much. I can see from some of the comments and questions that you've really got all of our minds racing into the level of thoughtfulness and that you put into a lot of these decisions. I mean, Kareem, it looks like you were following the chat a bit. So do you want to just go ahead and take it, or would you like me to go ahead and pose the questions to you?
I can take it. I've been trying to keep tabs on things and write some stuff. I'm gonna go in the order of the questions and see how many we can get through. So John asked early on, why did you need more time in this process? And I think my response to that is one of the things that it's sort of a framing that we bring consistently and inspired by Adrienne Murray Brown's emergent strategy, but design needs to move at the speed of trust when we're working with communities that have been historically harmed by architectural processes and institutions like public libraries. And so if we move too fast, then we risk losing people, or people feeling like not only do we not care, but we're just repeating the same cycles over and over. There's more work needed to overcome the initial trust deficit than just saying, trust me, this time it's going to be different. And so the more time is for creating the room for the dialogue to happen, for the team to metabolize that information, for us to turn it into design proposals, for us to bring that back to community members and say, here's what we're doing. Are we hitting those points? Here's how we're understanding you. Did we get it right? And then go back to the client and say, all right, we've done a feedback loop, we've vetted this concept or these concepts, and now client, you tell us like, how does this align with the parameters that your institution holds? So one thing that we were able to do was adjust milestone review points on design in some of the earlier phases to give us a little bit more breathing room for that feedback loop to happen. So it wasn't like every 2 weeks we're meeting with the client and they're making decisions and we just completely get out of sync with the pace of community. The other thing to note there is like community moves slower than a design project, and it feels like every design project moves faster than the last one. So if we're really moving at the pace of people's lives, it takes a month to get the word out, at least, for people to show up in enough significant numbers that then they're going to like be able to give us more information than a dozen people showing up at a meeting. So that's one thing. I know this is all really high level, so I'm sorry we can't go super deep, but you can reach out to us. And one other influence that this project had on the library system as a whole was actually that they, to tie into Nikki's question, after the success of the Community Design Advocates program for Midland and Colloqate, our CDA team, one of the implications for the library system that came from our community design advocates was you need community design advocates on all your projects. And not only that, you need a similar process for the creation of public art that goes into these buildings. And so for every subsequent project that ones that we did not work on, the library system actually had the architecture teams working on those projects have similar programs of community design advocates. So we were able to influence the system in a meaningful way. And then the actual like selection of artists who worked on the beautiful artwork that you saw in this building, we co-wrote with RAC the RFP for artists who had a participatory process themselves. So it wasn't just an artist coming and creating whatever they wanted, but the artists were of the communities of culture reflected in the library communities, and then also that their processes were participatory themselves. And there were members of the CDA team who sat on those committees as well to keep a through line going. The folks for the CDA program were recruited, and I'm going to say cut me off when you need to cut me off because I had not seen the clock. But CDAs in this project were recruited through a public call. But going back to that note that we made earlier, that like many people do not read the emails or don't have access to emails or aren't on the email listserv and wouldn't even read it if they were. Our initial public call was supported by some information sessions. So we distributed information about the CDA program to community-based organizations that serve or are led by the communities that we were trying to reach. They helped get it out to their networks. We met with folks who were curious. And then when we saw that there were gaps in that recruitment, we did direct outreach. So we worked with library staff primarily who were from the communities that were missing in representation, like East African communities, indigenous communities, folks who have experienced houselessness in the past or are service providers for unhoused folks. And they connected us with candidates that then we directly interviewed. So we didn't just let the, well, this is who we got, so I guess we'll go with it lie. We went the extra mile. Let's see. Do people now use the exterior spaces? Yes, they do. People
Kareem,
yeah.
you're 1 minute till 5.
Okay.
And then I just want to say one thing before everyone leaves. Don't leave before Kareem is done. But please put a thumbs up or thumbs down in the chat based on your experience with teams. So we at AIA Oregon can make adjustments as you guys would like to.
Thank you.
Can I also really quickly say, we can keep this going as long as we need to. If you need to leave, feel free to leave, but we can continue letting Kareem answer your questions past the time.
Thank you. Yes, Kareem and Sophia. So Sophia, I don't know if you're seeing anything in the chat or not. Not yet. Okay, well, I'll do my best. So there's only a few more. Yes, people use the library spaces. Thank you everybody for coming. thank you for those who have to drop off. People are reading outside with this beautiful weather, like folks are out there with their kids. There's power outlets in some of the benches, so people can actually sit out and like charge a device if they need to, which we wanted to make that resource available to the community. So yes, people are using the spaces, especially like the children's area outside is enclosed, and that's getting a ton of use because it's a safe place to be outdoors with your kids. I have a toddler, so that's been front of mind for me, and this is the closest library to where I live as well. Did the community input reflect the general trends of how a library is used now? I'd say broadly, yes, in terms of like shifting away from libraries are just quiet places for reading and for books to recognizing that these are places where people access information in many different ways, the necessity of like internet access, the ways that library staff support community members by connecting them to resources and other organizations. But the way that those uses were made specific to these communities and to these cultures is unique. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Sophia, that particular question. Not necessarily. Okay. Well, this is a question that you're going to have to answer because I didn't mention this at the beginning. I'm not an architect. I was focused on the engagement and organizing side of things for the most part. Many of the features that are included are fundamental principles of universal design. Did you use a universal design consultant, and was pursuing a universal design certification considered?
We did actually have a universal design consultant. We were working with Hannah Silver. This was actually before Hannah was working with Holst. So she was doing her own consulting at the time. And Hannah was great. Like, for example, the sensory room was something like she was working really closely with the library to figure out what that needed to be. She also was doing reviews of our plans and thinking about like how do people actually arrive at this space and find the door and other things. Um, if I remember correctly, she no longer uses the terms universal design, but I don't remember what she's trending towards. But we did not do a certification process. It was more, it felt like kind of just like a fluid part of the design conversation and a curiosity. So it's like when we were designing the canopy, I was like, is this canopy going to feel overwhelming for some folks who have like over visual stimulation? And so learned that actually like the height at which that visual is at really makes a difference. So when it's overhead and it's not as much in the view plane, that's actually helpful for folks and was probably a good balance. So yeah, it was just nice being able to have it in the design conversation as we went.
Yeah. Yes, Stephanie noted in the chat, inclusive design is the title that Hannah holds over at Holst now, and I
Thank
think
you.
that was a lot of the language she used too. I think the last question in here that I see is, does Colloqate act as an architect of record on any projects? Sophia, you want to answer that one?
We do. We are doing it with some very much smaller community projects. I think we're still like a team of 4 here in Portland. We are hoping to grow, but for larger scale projects, we do still generally team. But yeah, smaller projects, we've done architect of record and even partnered with other folks with us. So yeah.
Yeah. I think that was the last question I saw. If anyone wants to squeak in under the
I think we're probably okay to call it a night, but thank you so much for your really thought-provoking presentation. It was so exciting to see that. I did also want to mention that we're going to be looking at Midland Library again at the March DDS more from just a general architectural perspective. And so we'll be kind of take what you talked about today and see how that fits into the broader design. We'll, as well as a little more about some of the other library projects. So hope that folks can join us for that as well. So Kareem and Sophia, thank you so much for your time sharing with us today. And Paul and Kathy, thank you for letting us trailblaze your
Yes.
new system. It seems
Well,
like
thanks for your
overall
patience.
yeah, overall it was okay, but maybe a few hiccups that can be worked out next time. So thank you again, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful night and you enjoy this sunny weather we have for the next couple days. And we'll see you again in March.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.